right. Welcome, everyone, back to the Yogic Studies podcast. I'm your host, Seth Powell. This is episode 48. And today I am joined by author and publisher Briana Dana Akers. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I've known about you for quite a long time through your books, and I'm sure many of our audience and our listeners will be very familiar with you through the books that we're going to be talking about today. But maybe you can begin just with a brief introduction to who you are and what you do.
Okay. I got into yoga in 1970, and it was through my mother. She brought home a book one day called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation by Jess Stern. And I thought, well, my mom was always getting into stuff. She was ahead of her time. She was into organic gardening and preventive health and stuff like that. So I thought, well, what kind of crazy thing is mom into now? So I picked it up and I said, oh, this is really interesting. So I started doing some of the asanas and trying more of them. And my mother said, you know, there's somebody who teaches this at the YWCA. Why don't you take a class? And I said, well, okay. So I went down to the Y. I was in 8th grade. And there was an American woman there, Janet Bouillon. She was married to an Indian-born researcher at the Upjohn Pharmaceutical Company. And she welcomed me into her class. It was me, this little teenage kid, with about 45 or 50 middle-aged women, all trying to stay in shape. And I ended up taking yoga classes for the next 5 years. This was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, southwestern Michigan.
Okay.
And then I went to college. I went over to the eastern side of the state, to Ann Arbor, at the University of Michigan. And they had a foreign language requirement. And I just had the vaguest knowledge that Sanskrit and yoga were somehow connected. And I looked on the long list of languages you could take. So I said, wow, why don't I take Sanskrit? And so I did that for my first 3 years of undergraduate studies. And my teacher there was Madhav Deshpande.
Oh, wow.
So he was young back then. Jet black hair, he looked like a Bollywood idol. And he had only been on the faculty, I think, like 2 or 3 years at that point. So I studied with him. And then my senior year, I went abroad to South India on the College Year in India program, the University of Wisconsin College Year in India program. And I went to South India and studied at Andhra University, which is on the East Coast, Visakhapatnam. And I studied really intensely for a year there. I mean, like 4 hours a day in class and another 4 hours a night at homework. And I studied with another guy, Neil Delmonico, who later went to Chicago and got a PhD and has written stuff about Gaudiya Vaishnava stuff. So we studied Panini, and we studied some kind of general stuff. And then also I took my first try at translating the Yoga Predipikā. So I did that. It took about 3 months working with the teacher there. His name was J. Prabhakara Shastri, and he had a number of American students over the years. Then I came back to Ann Arbor, enrolled for graduate school for 2 years, studied Hindi Urdu with Peter Hook. I taught the grammar section of second year Sanskrit, and I took some Indian history courses with Tom Troutman and John Broomfield. And then after about 2 years of that, after 6 straight years of higher education, I was like ready to take a break. Also, you know, as I'm sure you and everybody listening to this broadcast is well aware, there's been a surplus of PhDs for almost half a century now. So going forward with a PhD just didn't strike me as really viable. So I knew a couple in California, Tom and Allison Hunter. Tom, last I knew, he was teaching Sanskrit at the University of Washington, I think, or else British Columbia. So I went out and stayed with them for a week and found a place to live. And then I bought a computer and I started reading the manual. And then I got a job and then another job and then another job. So I ended up spending 10 years in the Bay Area, working in publishing, pre-press, printing, advertising, graphic arts, that whole smear of stuff. And then totally unknowns to myself, I took a trip that was going to change my life. 1991, I took a cruise. I flew down to LA and got on a cruise ship for a 1 week cruise off the coast of Mexico. That was to see a total solar eclipse, and which we did successfully see the total solar eclipse. And one day we were docked at Cabo San Lucas, and I started chatting with this interesting looking woman. And before you know it, we finished the cruise and we came home and we were talking on the phone. And I decided to drop everything and I moved out to New York and we got married 3 months after the day we met.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And yeah, that's this whole story in itself. It didn't give me enough time to scope out my mother-in-law. I'll put it that way. So I helped. She owned and operated a little gift shop, so I helped her with that for a bit. And I was thought I'd try my hand at writing science fiction. I did that for a bit, and then I was thinking, I should really get back to the Sanskrit and the yoga and stuff. And I said, I have this translation. Maybe I should just revise it and publish it. So I went back to. I got a new grammar book. I got Ashoka Klujkar's grammar book and went through that and just kind of refreshed my whole knowledge. And then translated the book a second time. And then I used that to launch YogaVidya.com because I felt like I had to have some kind of something to start it with. I just can't jump up and down saying, hey, I'm a publisher. Send me your work. I had to something.
What year would that have been when you started the press?
The business was formed in 2001. And then in 2002 is when the Pradipika came out.
Okay.
And then that actually just started selling. It met the need at that time. And then so I started looking. I said, I got to come out with some more books.
And I've got a copy of that one right here.
Oh, awesome!
Mine's all annotated and noted up. I've been using it for years.
Thanks.
And I'm sure folks will recognize this Hatha Yoga Predipika, or Haṭhapradīpikā, as we often call it now.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious though, Brian. I mean, I think one of the reasons for the success, although I'm curious, I'd like to ask you. I mean, let me put it this way. Let me ask you: were you expecting this translation of the Haṭhapradīpikā to start selling and to become a very popular and widely used translation of the text? Or at the time, it sounds like you thought, well, I have this, I might as well put it out there. But you're saying it immediately started selling right away.
Yeah, it did. I mean, not in vast quantities, but regularly. I was hoping that it would, but you never really know until you do something. So I put it out, and it seemed to be selling well enough. So why don't I come out with some more?
But let me ask. But with this first one, did you did this independently, right? You didn't go to a publisher and say, I've got this book manuscript. You decided you were going to take this on and do it yourself.
Yeah.
Did you have any experience doing that previously? You said you had done some writing with science fiction and things of that nature, but had you had any experience in publishing?
Yeah. Well, my 10 years in the Bay Area, some of that was spent in book publishers. Some of that was spent in pre-press companies, working in the printing process. Some of it was spent in advertising. So I did have experience working in publishing. Most of it was what they call production, kind of the stuff at the end. So design, typesetting, proofreading, illustration, printing,
Hmm.
like that. Not really much in editorial at the front end. Um, I thought I thought, well, I had a very specific idea of how I wanted to do it.
Hmm.
And so I didn't want to hand it off to somebody else and have them mess it up or potentially mess it up. So I said, let me do it myself. I can do it. I can typeset it. I'll find a photographer and a model and
Hmm.
I'll do the whole thing. And it worked out.
Yeah, in my mind, I think the success of these books, and we'll talk about the other ones,
Sure.
is their simplicity and their lucidity. I mean, the translation is very good. It's very
Mhm.
solid, and it's sort of not messing around. It's just got the Devanagari in Sanskrit, as folks probably know. I'm just trying to find a page here. A lot of these have the images as well,
Mhm.
but you've just got the Devanagari and
Mhm.
then the English translation, and you've got a few footnotes here and there that help to add some details, but it's not too cluttered with notes, and so really you're just getting the text
Right.
and nothing else. And so there's
Right.
something about that for study purposes, I think, makes these very accessible and very useful for
Oh,
students.
good. Good. Yeah, I wanted to just try to put myself in the background in the service of the text and then try to present the text as cleanly as I could and not add a lot of opinions and speculation and stuff like that. Make it
Yeah.
as if they were actually reading the text.
Now, with this text in particular, the Haṭhapradīpikā or Hatha Yoga Pradipika, I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's been a lot of new research recently on
Yeah,
this
Mallinson.
text by James
Yeah,
Mallinson and Jason Birch
yeah,
and Jürgen Haneda. There's a whole project that's sort of just finishing now,
right.
that's putting out a new critical edition based on extensive manuscript research. And in some ways, the text is changing a little bit in the
Uh-huh.
process of that. I'm curious, do you recall which Sanskrit edition were you following for this translation? Do you know if it's based on Brahmananda's commentary?
Yeah, I use the Adyar edition.
Yeah.
There's that one by, was it Panchamasinha or somebody,
Hmm.
that Motilal has been reprinting forever. That one had like probably 400 or 500 typos in it, I think. So I tried to correct all the typos.
Hmm.
Um, I did not research. I didn't really have the scholarly apparatus to, go through and locate manuscripts, and it was
Sure.
beyond my expertise to do that. So it's a good thing that Mallinson and Birch and other people are doing that project.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you did end up connecting with Jim Mallinson, right? Because some of the following books after this one were translated by James Mallinson himself. So how did that come about?
That just came about through Dominic Wujastics. I don't know if that's even how you pronounce his name.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uyastic.
Indology mailing list.
Okay, sure.
And I was a member of that, and I was reading the stuff and reading the stuff. And an email got posted, said James Mallinson. I said, "Oh, that guy seems knowledgeable." This was before he'd published anything, really.
Yeah.
He was working at the Clay Sanskrit Library. So I sent him an email and asked him if he was interested, and he said he was. So we put out two more texts. And then another participant on that email list was Lars Martin Fosse in Norway. And so he always seemed pretty feisty and opinionated and concise in his emails. I thought, this guy might be a good guy to translate a couple books. So he did the Gita and the Kāmasūtra. And the Kāmasūtra is not really a yoga book, I realize, although it does have some interesting asanas in it, joint asanas, you could say.
Sure.
But I had several reasons to translate it. One is it's just one of the most famous books in the world, and one of the most notorious books in the world. And I thought the existing translations were all substandard. So I thought, let's do this, and then maybe it'll sell well. Turns out it didn't.
That's the Kāmasūtra one?
Yeah, Kāmasūtra didn't sell many copies at all.
Oh,
I mean, it trickles out every year, but
maybe because it's at YogaVidya.com.
It could be that. I think times have just changed. So like now anybody who's interested in sex, for instance, can get on the internet and you can interact with, women doing things in real time, couples doing things in real time, full color, full screen. And, my book is just like static black and white line art.
Mm.
And then I've also I call it's in the sour spot. You've heard of the sweet spot, like on a tennis racket or something where things are in the sweet spot. The Kāmasūtra is sort of in the sour spot because not only does it have to compete with all this massive stuff about sex, but also I keep getting periodically shut down or reduced by Google AdWords and stuff for having unsuitable family content.
Oh, interesting.
So periodically I have to, email them, would you please start showing this book again? And, so it's kind of in a sour spot, but I don't regret doing it. I think the edition is quite nice. It has the original Sanskrit, which most editions don't have.
Sure.
And the translation is just based on the text itself. It doesn't paraphrase the commentary. And then the artwork in it is also contemporary to the original text. A lot of the books use like Persian miniatures from like 1500 years later, or they use photographs of modern couples, So I'm happy with how the book came out, but it didn't become a bestseller. Yeah. I was hoping to kind of subsidize the other books, but it didn't.
Yeah, well, I know fully well about getting sort of flagged online for content. I mean, we've run into this issue sometimes running ads for online courses on Tantra, and I think it's sort of a similar arena there where it's just become a trigger word that gets flagged for for something that's inappropriate or pornographic, and it's like the content that we're promoting couldn't be further from that. Yeah. And in fact, it's supposed to be re-educational in the face of some of this appropriated and hyper-sexualized in the name of Tantra that we do see online. So we couldn't even promote a course about traditional Indian Tantra because just the word itself has become sort of problematic, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So okay, that book hasn't. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Also, Google and Amazon are just these huge bureaucracies. Trying to get through to find a person first of all instead of an AI chat.
Absolutely.
Text, and then you get to a person, and then they're not in a department that has any authority to fix things and so forth. So, they become vast, especially Amazon. They sell like hundreds of millions of products now. And so it's a problem.
Right. And so for Mallinson's books that he did for you, he did the Śivasaṃhitā and the Garunda Samhita. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were those texts, did you propose that to him, or did you say, are there any yoga texts you'd like to translate, and he proposed them to you, or how did those two texts come about?
I proposed them to him, and mostly because I was still laboring under the misapprehension that along with the Pradipika were the three main texts of yoga, of Hatha yoga. And a lot of that is just kind of left over from 19th century Indology. And I think he's going to correct that misapprehension with his, the translations he's doing now. Now, from a business point of view, that helps that there's that perception that those are the three main texts because people all around the world are Googling them and looking for them and have heard the name and stuff like that. And whereas the text he's now working on, nobody's heard of them. Nobody's going to be Googling them. There's no built-in audience. So, keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, I think we've been building an audience. We have
Yeah,
some audience,
yeah,
but of course, in terms of yeah, from a business point of view and a global capital market, there's not as much demand, let's say, for the Dattatreya Yoga Shastra and the
yeah,
Viveka Martanda.
yeah.
Hopefully, they will be flying off the shelves for you, Jim, if you're listening. Um, but it's true, and it is sort of happenstance, I think, historically, that those three texts of Hatha Yoga were kind of extrapolated to become kind of like the three of the canon. And I do think about this sometimes, about how it's sort of the fact that these were translated, and even more that they were published, and then the publications were retranslated into many different languages and reissued again and again. I think a lot of this goes back to the Theosophical Society.
Yeah,
You mentioned that Adyar edition that you worked from,
yeah.
and a lot of their early English translations, I think, did have this huge impact on creating awareness and perception about these texts. At the same time, I think from a catalog manuscript record, I think those texts, part of the reason they were selected, I imagine, is that the transmission histories of them. There's so many manuscripts of those
Mm,
three in particular that it does show that they were very popular, very
yeah.
influential texts within their time in India. I mean, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, I think, for very good reason, right, still is
Hmm.
probably the most influential Hatha Yoga text. But now we know there are so many others that
Yeah,
also kind of deserve to be on the shelf, so to
yeah,
speak. Um,
for sure.
but that work hadn't really, I think Jim had just started kind of scratching the surface on some of that in the early 2000s when he was
Right.
translating for you. So, there's been so much that's been done since that time. So I'm curious, just even to get a little window into the world of publishing, and
Mm.
publishing physical books these days is sort of,
Yeah,
sometimes you hear, is sort of a dying breed. And you spoke about everything being online and digital, and I'm
yeah.
I'm curious how, if things have changed for you over the last 20 years or so. But in the beginning, and maybe today, do you print a certain number of physical books, and do you ship and distribute them yourselves, or do you go through distributors? I mean, I know you can purchase these books on Amazon.
Yeah.
How does all that work? Take
Oh,
us
yeah. Publishing.
inside the world of publishing Sanskrit yoga translations.
Yeah. Well, I'm 66 years old, so I am a bit from an earlier era, back when printed books were, you know, the biggest thing. Um, the 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 book publishing industry has survived digital changes pretty well. I was just reading in Publishers Weekly that the larger publishers have reduced their employment by about 40% since the turn of the century. So, in the last 25 years or so.
Mm.
Um, Magazines, it could be 60, 70%. They've lost like 80, 70% of their employees. Newspapers have lost maybe 90% of their employees. Just
Wow.
papers close down like I think we lose like two a week in the United States. So, so book publishing is held up pretty well because people really do like to read a book and be able to write in it, find things. We do offer ebooks now. So that's a new thing. The two really critical companies in publishing now are Amazon, as you would expect. They're the world's largest retailer of books, and they're constantly opening up new branches. I think they're in like 24 countries now. And they were really great in the beginning. They would just automatically carry your book. They would say they'd ship it immediately. They'd sell it at a discount, even if they were losing money, etc. Now they've become more difficult to work with. They'll probably carry your book, but they may not offer shipping, or they might put up a listing but only let third parties sell it. So they're more difficult to deal with. The other important company is called Ingram, Ingram, and they're the world's largest wholesaler of books. So they're a family, completely different style of company from Amazon. They're a family company based in Tennessee. They have, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 employees as opposed to 1.5 million or something. And you can print at an offset printer. You can do a print run of 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 and ship books to them. But they were very smart and prescient. And around the turn of the millennium, they started a print-on-demand service. And so right inside their distribution and warehouse facilities, they also have digital printing presses. And so you upload your PDF of your interior text and upload your PDF of the cover. They keep it there. And then when anybody orders a book anywhere, like if it's Amazon or Barnes and Noble or an independent bookseller, they'll print it and ship it out. And they can handle really any quantity. Wow. So rather than having 5,000 books sitting in a warehouse just gathering dust, you just print it out like that. Now, at one point, I did think, well, I'm getting bigger. I'll do some offset print runs. And I did do those.
And how's the quality on those? Do you notice any differences?
The offset are a little better, but not hugely better. I don't think a general person in the general public can tell the quality difference. And you really have to like give them one of each. I've done this, give them one of each and look at them, ask them if they see a quality difference. And they'll look back and forth. You notice it more on the photographs. So I did do some offset printing for a while, but it didn't work out as well. It's sort of like when you do offset printing, you're trying to replicate the business model of a larger 20th century company. And I'm just kind of a small 21st century company. So print on demand works better. And then Ingram they've built more and more of these facilities. So they do it in the US, they do it in the UK, they do it in Australia, they do it in the UAE. And they've also contracted with other facilities around the world. So they'll also get your book printed in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, all over the place. So those are the two companies you really are the most important to deal with.
So for any of our listeners, if they're just individuals, if they're authors or scholars, if they wanted to self-publish, is Ingram like a pretty good route that you would recommend for folks?
It can be, but they won't help you sell or market the books to any extent. And so you can do that, but if nobody wants to buy it, nobody will buy it, and it'll just kind of sit there in their digital library. So that's actually the biggest problem now with publishing. Also, like when I first got started in the 1980s in publishing, the publishing industry produced maybe 300,000 books a year. Now it produces about 3 million books a year in the United States alone. It's analogous to like what's going on with music, like Spotify. or
Sure.
YouTube and videos. The cost of entry's gone down. All the barriers to entry have gone down. So consequently, you have an explosion of content, and then your problem becomes, how do people find your content? So that's happened with printed books too. So
I suppose that's the advantage of Amazon, is that you have the built-in marketplace and search capabilities on that
yeah,
side, right?
yeah. What Amazon now has done, though, is they now sell advertising within Amazon. And they're now selling tens of billions of dollars a year in ads. So if you want your book, but not just book, it's anything they sell. If you want your book to be at the top of the search results, you have to buy advertising. And so the other publishers have to buy advertising. So
Mm.
everybody's buying advertising within Amazon to get to the top of the search results. And it's like the Hunger Games. You know, you're just you're just competing, and Amazon doesn't really care if the books actually sell or not, because they make money from the advertising. So I'm a little down on Amazon these days because it's just not as easy as it used to be.
Sure.
But you can't avoid them. I mean, they're the world's largest retailer.
So, Brian, your latest book
Hmm.
that you've just recently published, and I think what prompted you to reach out to me, which
It's
I
true.
appreciate that you did.
Uh-huh.
You've just written this, what you call the Yoga Manifesto
Uh-huh.
by Briana Dana Akers. It's a short, about 60-page
Yeah.
little tract.
Yeah.
Why yoga? Why now?
Yeah.
What prompted you to write this yoga manifesto, and why now?
Why did it come out the way it did? Well, I was thinking I should, we have these translations, and, to be honest, a lot of them are pretty weird. They're talking about all this weird stuff. I thought maybe I should do some sort of reader's guide, or history of yoga, or something that would help people, give them a framework to understand the translations. And I didn't, so I just started getting ideas. So, like one day, my wife and I were driving to Kingston, a nearby city, and we stop at a stoplight. And I said, yoga works either way. And she looks at me and says, what are you talking about? I said, well, it works if our modern world continues, because it helps people cope with the stress of modernity. And then if all this collapses for any of a number of reasons, it also helps people cope with the scarcity of the collapse of modernity. And so I just started writing down, ideas I had, and eventually started organizing them, and then writing it. So I had some things I wanted to get off my chest, and some things, ideas I've had for a while. So I thought, I was originally thinking of calling it like the yoga of the force.
Mm.
And then I thought, well, it's going to be more than hatha yoga. It's kind of preachy, not preachy, but it's a little didactic. Let me call it the Yoga Manifesto, because it's going to be short. It's going to have a lot of muzzle velocity. It's going to be snappy. So let me call it that.
Right. You do have this line. You say, rather than translating hatha yoga as an instrumental compound, as yoga done with force, one could instead translate hatha yoga as a genitive compound. These are, of course, referring to the Sanskrit case endings,
Mhm.
as the yoga of force. Yes, just like in Star Wars.
I'm curious to see what scholars are going to say about that. I don't know if they're going to poo-poo it, or if they're going to say, "Oh yeah, that's obvious."
Well, I will just say I don't think it's obvious how we translate the compounds hatha
Hmm.
yoga, raja
Hmm.
yoga. There is, I think, an open discussion about how we best understand the relationship between those words, and how, first of all, how is yoga being used,
Hmm.
in a compound like hatha yoga? Does
Yeah.
it mean the technique of hatha, technique of force? Is it the method of Hatha, or does yoga refer to the goal, i.e.,
Mm,
samadhi or moksha or liberation or
mm,
union? And it's then the goal of yoga is being accomplished by means of hatha, by means of
mm,
force, or the yoga of. So I don't think that that's actually immediately obvious, or that there's
mhm.
a universal agreement about that.
Right.
And then, yeah, what is this hatha? What is this force of hatha
Mm,
yoga? I think that too is an open question. I think
yeah.
Mallinson has written about this. Jason Birch has written about this
Yeah.
as well, suggesting that the force, well, one, it could either refer to the difficulty and strenuousness, the sort of tapas of having to do these physical acts of yoga.
Hmm.
Or I think Jason Birch had suggested, I don't know if he still believes this to be the case, but that it could refer to this type of yoga forcing the breath into the central channel,
Mm,
raising energetic forces like kundalini up the sushumna nadi. So
hmm.
it's the yoga of force is the force of kundalini, you might say. So
Mm.
all that is just to say, I think you're on safe ground, and the
Okay.
yoga of force and may the force be with you is kind of a fun play on
Yeah.
the hatha, um,
You might
and
get new adherents too. You might get new people coming to your site, and you're for from Star Wars. Or if they see a connection, this could be a recruiting device, recruiting tool.
certainly a good SEO, search engine
Yeah.
optimization for us if we have more Star Wars hits on the website. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is something to that though about this inner force and power
Hmm.
that we all have that can be untapped through yoga. I don't know if that's exactly what the Hatha yogis were talking about, but maybe they were in some way, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, this book though, the Yoga Manifesto, you've separated it into, let's see, is it six short chapters, six different topics. You have yoga and history, yoga and money, yoga and religion, yoga and science, yoga and society, yoga and the future.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us just sort of a quick hit on some of those? Some of um, Give us a little taster for the Yoga Manifesto.
Well, yoga and history, I go back to the very beginning, and that interesting thing is yoga goes back to the very beginning. I mean, we it goes back at least 25 centuries, I think. It may be older than that, but we don't have any evidence that it's older than that. So I wanted to give context. And so I gave a quick history of 25 centuries. Um, yoga and I think the interesting thing about that is just how today everybody knows about it. Yoga, it's got I'd say mostly a good reputation. But by the end of the 19th century, it was like at a real low point. Yoga and money, I sort of is a slightly tongue in cheek. It's Have you ever seen those TV series like How to Become a Dictator or something like that? So how to do this, how to do that. So I thought, well, how do you make a lot of money with yoga? And so I start out with, well, first try not to lose money. First of all, it's not about money. It's free. Second of all, try not to lose too much money and then make a little money. And then if you want to make a lot of money, set yourself up as a guru. And if you really want to make a lot of money, start a clothing company. So that's how you make money.
Not a book company.
Not a book company. No,
Okay.
not a book
Okay.
company.
Note
Um,
taken.
no, that is definitely not it. Um, the second one, the next chapter was on yoga and religion. Oh, you know that old saying about you really don't know what you think about something until you start writing about it. So I wasn't really planning on saying, when I started the book, I really wasn't planning on saying that yoga is not a religion. But I read Fritz Stahl's book on exploring mysticism. And I was thinking, yoga really doesn't have that kind of organized superstructure that organized religion has. So, and it appears in Buddhism and Hinduism and everything. So maybe it's not really a religion. So let me just go with that. So, so that was that chapter saying it's for everybody. It's egalitarian. It's for everybody. You're not stuck or limited by a religion or it or anything. The next one was science. Um, this came out a little more pro science than I expected. I really wasn't expecting it to have such a pro science perspective. Maybe it's because I used to be an amateur astronomer and I spent my high school years building telescopes, so I still have that mentality a bit. But I'm thinking that yoga and science have just barely started to interact. And especially the life sciences that look at human consciousness are still on the very earliest stages of understanding the brain, understanding health and longevity, understanding consciousness. So maybe in the 21st and 22nd centuries, those two will co-evolve and form. Um, then I think the next section was on society. And it's like, and that this is where I answered the questions: why yoga and why now?
Mm.
And yoga, I think it's three things. One is just yoga is so great. It's so great for you. It's so great for your health, for your outlook, your mental health, your physical health, all the usual things we think about. And then I think it's also kind of an emergent phenomenon. It's not something dictated from above. It's not, there haven't been powerful institutions like the Catholic Church. There haven't been powerful institutions like the federal government, or so on. So it's just kind of emerged from the grassroots. And, uh, and then finally, I think it's become so prevalent because of our post World War II prosperity. People are much less into organized religion, organized things, hierarchies, um, and they're interested in spiritual things, experiential things. And it's almost kind of like yoga is like, after 25 centuries, it's sort of like tailor made for the present moment, which is kind of remarkable when you think about it. I mean, it is pretty remarkable. Um, and then the final thing, I look ahead for a couple centuries and what's going to be the future of yoga. And people have remarked that they think the book has quite an optimistic tone. And I'm optimistic about yoga, even if the rest of the world is not doing too well.
Mm.
So if the world kind of progresses at its current way, I think yoga will kind of progress in its current way. It'll help people cope with modernity, with stress, with complexity, and so forth, loneliness, mental health, all sorts of stuff. If the world runs into some serious bumps, um, I think yoga will survive that because after all, it survived medieval times. Um, for several centuries, yoga was really militarized. So if we had to, we could militarize again, maybe. And then if things really, really collapse, um, yoga could just help people survive. It doesn't require any high technology. It doesn't really require, it just requires a little bit of space. So that's kind of my thought pattern. It's from 25 centuries ago up till about 2 centuries in the future, and it's how does it interact with the economy? How does it interact with religion? How does it interact with science? And then why is it so popular? It's really kind of odd when you think about it. That's kind of what the book is about.
Yeah. Well, it's clearly meeting a need that people are seeking today, or
Mhm.
it wouldn't be so popular, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think about the ways that yoga can impact society, but likewise that our societies and these different cultures and global cultures are impacting and changing yoga and what the
Yeah.
future may hold.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic, Brian. Well, do you want to tell folks where they can find this book?
Oh, you can come to our website, and then I have links to like 80 different retailers. You can also buy it directly from us. So it's YogaVidya.com.
YogaVidya.
And yeah.
We'll drop
And
the
I'll just
link
say,
in the show notes.
oh, pardon?
We'll drop a link for everybody
Oh,
here
okay, great.
in the show notes, so they'll have
Great.
that. And that YogaVidya is actually the name of the conference that we just ran this past weekend.
I was just about to mention that. It looks
And
good. I'm going to pay the $50 and get access to it.
I'm happy to gift it to you as a gift friend of the show here. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, I'd love for you to have access to that. But it's obviously a great name,
Hmm.
and a great title to represent this incredible complexity and depth of knowledge and wisdom that is the yoga traditions. Tell us a little bit about the press and where it stands today, and maybe do you have any plans for the future for future book publications, or what's going on? What's going on with the business?
Yeah. So the press is just me. It's just me sitting in this room, sitting at my computer. And then
And
there's
and
it's just
and where are you, by the way, Brian?
so I'm in Woodstock, New York, and so I'm about 2 hours north of New York City and about an hour south of Albany. And we're just maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes from the Hudson River. So it's a place that is kind of going from funky to gentrified as each decade goes by. As we get more and more, now we're getting lots and lots of people coming up from Brooklyn and buying second houses. So it's like Kingston's starting to turn into a mini Brooklyn with lots of, coffee shops and stuff like that. The press is just me and moral support from my wife and her advice. Couldn't do it without her, really. There's just too many ups and downs in starting a small business to not have somebody to help you.
Sure.
There's one obvious big hole in our list of books, and that's the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
Um, so that's the most likely next book. As you know, there's already like dozens of editions of those out.
There's a
So I'll
couple
have to
out there,
think.
aren't there?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll have to think about that. Beyond that, if any of your listeners want to send me a proposal, tell them to send it in. I don't get that money. I wrote a submissions guideline
Mm,
designed to discourage people from just sending me any old thing. A lot of publishers, even very small publishers, get like thousands of manuscripts a month,
mm.
at least hundreds. Larger publishers get thousands of manuscripts a month. Now, even agents, literary agents, get like thousands a month. So I wrote my submission guidelines, which are on the website, to be kind of stringent, so I don't have to deal with all that. But so I'm probably going to do the Yoga Sutras, and then I'll see after that. If this book generates a lot of interest, controversy, conversation, maybe there'll be a follow up of some kind. I don't know what it would be, but that's it.
All right. Very
Yeah.
good. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Brian. It's nice to get to know you a little bit, and fascinating to hear the story about the history of Yoga Vidya and this small business and press that I think in its own way has actually had quite an impact in the yoga
Wow.
world and yoga scholarship. I think I really do believe this, that many of our listeners will have at least a couple of your books already on their shelves, and
Great.
maybe if not, maybe they'll go check out your website and pick up a few more. But I think your work has had an impact.
Oh, good.
So,
Good. I get very little feedback. I just put them out in the world and I get very little feedback.
Some Amazon reviews here and there, perhaps?
Yeah, some reviews here and there, maybe an email like once a year or something like that. Very
Okay.
little.
Okay.
So I'm glad to hear it's had a positive impact. I assume it does, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe you got to get out there a little bit more, do some more podcasts or,
Yeah.
and then, yeah,
Deliver
but,
some talks or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Very good, Brian. Well, I hope we can stay in touch and
Sure.
wish you the best.
I'm really
And
impressed with what you're doing.
thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, in the same way, I think that with publishing, you're trying to get this information and knowledge into people's hands and reach wider audiences. Similarly, our goal at Yogic Studies is to try to take this specialized academic knowledge and to make it more accessible and available to the broader public, but especially to yoga practitioners and
It's not
teachers.
easy. There's quite a gulf.
There is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy, but it's worth doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Brian. Well, thanks
Okay.
again. And thank you to all of our listeners. Please, I'm supposed to say subscribe and reshare this and leave us some comments below.
Definitely.
And all that jazz. And but really, thanks everybody for listening and supporting the podcast. And go check out YogaVidya.com. All right. Thanks, Brian. Be well.
Thank you.
And take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much.